So we now have the second part of tonight's session. As you recall, at the beginning, in my presentation on the first night, I said, you only have to do two things. You create value, because if you don't do that, you don't have anything. And then we talked about, what kind of value, how much, for whom, all of those really important questions. But the second part of the easy formula for startups was you have to capture value. You have to capture something so you can do it again. And that's the business model or the venture model. And tonight we have to give some views on that is Rich Kivel. I've known Rich for a number of years. We were judges at the 100K. Was it 50K or 100K? 100K. He went on actually a year. He left after being a judge. He went and joined one of the companies that came out of the 100K that got into a little bit of needed some guidance, and took that into the bioinformatics area. And from there, it just kept going. So I'm going to let Rich introduce and tell us what he's doing tonight.
Great.
Okay. Rich Kivel, thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Hey, it's great to be back. My name is Rich Kivel, and my background actually for probably the first 20 years of my career was really more on the entrepreneurship side of the world. Helping start companies and getting involved really early with technology, software companies, database companies, mostly in the Boston area. And then at one point, I joined as CEO of a company that spun out of MIT that Joe referenced. And that was a company that was called Molecularware. It was one of the finalists in the MIT Business Plan competition. And it was a company basically doing bioinformatics, so software for scientists. And this was at the point where the human genome was becoming really the talk of the town. Everybody was focused around what could we do with all that data. And there was all these instruments making so much data. Tracking in Excel spreadsheets was becoming really a nightmare. And that's what most labs and pharma companies and biotech companies were doing. Really smart guy named Seth Taylor and a whole bunch of other folks came together, started this company, launched it, and then I joined a couple of years or a year later or so. I was brought in by the initial investors. And that was sort of my first baby step into the world of healthcare, digital health, healthcare IT, that sort of thing. And then went on, we sold that company a number of years later. But our investors were based in London. So I was spending a ton of time going back and forth to the UK, and being part of the MIT community, of course, you sort of gravitate towards the entrepreneurial communities wherever you wind up. And a number of years later, I, thanks to Joe, got involved with the MIT Enterprise Forum, which at that time was under the umbrella of the Alumni Association, and served on the international board. And then because of that, started spending more time in Europe, helping them develop chapters there. And I really kind of fell in love with Europe and the UK, but I kept running companies and being part of management teams for a number of years. And then ultimately had built so many relationships in Europe and got to know the venture community really well and the startup community. You start to really realize the big differences between the things that we see every day here in the US, and especially in environments like Boston and so many of the other incredible ecosystems and hubs. And at the time, you go over to Europe, that just did not exist. It was the entire concept of commercialization of intellectual property and angel financing, A, Series B, Series C, et cetera, really hard to do. And it's still a hell of a lot harder to do it over there than it is here. But it was a very clear indicator that you had these great universities in Europe. They were creating phenomenal technology, and they all wanted to enter the US at some point, right? I think that's sort of the vision for most of the companies. But they had no idea how to do it, and there wasn't a lot of funding to do it. Most of the venture funds, especially 10 years ago, like a big fund in Europe would be 50 million under management, like 50 million AUM. So that kind of fund is probably doing really small investments, right? They probably want to do 20 investments over the life of the fund. So that means that they're going to be putting in 2.5 million on average over the life of each company. So these were like pre-Series A seed type investments. And then what would happen is those companies, the few that would start to succeed and now need the Series A, the Series B, et cetera, they would have to leave and go to the US to do that, to raise that capital. And it's also why we have so many phenomenal European companies here. And that's where I saw a gap in the market, which was late stage growth funding in Europe and helping companies enter the US market. A handful of years ago, I stopped going from running companies to sort of sitting on boards and doing angel investments, and then started a venture capital fund called Gray Bella Capital. And Gray Bella is based out of London. It's a Luxembourg legal structure. And our focus is we invest in European and UK technology and health tech companies. Mostly it's Series A and beyond, and then help those companies internationalize, which is a lot of fun. So we see technology companies ranging from semiconductors to drone technology, SaaS platforms, banking as a service platforms, which we invested in recently. And then on the healthcare side, we're seeing things from med tech, nothing to do with pharmaceutical discovery, but platform technologies for discovery. We're looking at a lot of companies in the area of digital health and med tech. And the one thing that is true in every single one of those is the business model is different and changing constantly. It's absolutely amazing. When I think about, back when I was running MolecularWare, which is a bioinformatics, basically software company, and I think about how those same companies are operating today, it's an entirely different business model. And it keeps changing on a regular basis. So what you have now is a lot of companies trying to go international. And you have challenges when you do that, right? So selling into the German market, whether you're a gaming company or you're coming up with the next great travel app, or you're selling medical technologies to do diagnostics, selling into the German market is different than selling into the Nordic or the Baltic market. And that's much different than selling into the UK market, which has a one healthcare system. It's all under one big old umbrella in the UK. Then trying to enter the US market, it becomes an entirely different story. So one of the reasons I like doing this class so much, specifically around the business model piece, is because it's dynamic. It constantly is changing. And we're going to talk today a little bit about that and really learn a little bit about how companies are changing their business model in order to either meet the market, meet the geography or the demographics of shifting markets, or even the regulatory changes that happen in different markets that impact how people sell. So my goal today is to share a little bit of that with you. And please don't, this is not formal, obviously. You got a question, it doesn't matter if I'm talking or not, raise your hand, and then I'll come and pick on you. You don't have to try to stockpile questions to the end. One of the things that I really want to make sure that we get across is that there's no such thing as the permanent or the perfect business model. If you think about any company that you have touched on a regular basis, their model has changed. If they're still in business and they're succeeding, their models have changed and will continue to change. And when they stop changing their models, that's typically when they wind up going out of business. That's when they collapse. If you look at some of the biggest bankruptcies and the biggest failures of companies that have incredible names. I mean, think about in the retail sector, the Neiman Marcus and, Barney's in New York and groups like that. Many of them didn't keep up and they've been absolutely crushed. Just recently, the organization that owns part of Neiman Marcus, and I forget the other one that they're part of, they just had to file for bankruptcy. You're dealing with massive multi-billion-dollar companies that have 100-year-old names. You think, how'd you screw this up? Right? It's like you have an incredible name. You've got famous sort of people promoting your products, and here you are struggling to stay alive. So we're going to talk about some case studies as well. Good. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Zoom can't hear you whenever you turn your head.
Oh, good. All right. So I'll be very careful. I love it. Thank you for telling me. That's awesome. Thank you very much. Good. And I'll speak up as well, but that's good to know. And yeah, so they can hear a little bit better. And it's nice to have a class this big. Joe and I were saying, we both, I've been lucky enough to be part of some of his classes for a very long time. And, it used to be just completely packed. And then, of course, COVID came, and we'd look out, and some of the classes we did, there'd be 8, 10 people, in the room, and there'd be 200 online. So now the shift has happened. So it's great to see people live and in person. And so please ask questions and share relevant experience, things you disagree with. If you want to talk about a startup you're doing or something that's being commercialized, and you want to think about how that market impacts compared to your competitors, make sure you jump up and do that, because I have a number of slides, but not many. So most of this is really a discussion. So let's talk about the importance of choosing a business model. Lots of definitions for business model, and obviously choosing the right business model can mean the success or the failure of a company. But the ability to adapt the business model is even more important than selecting one. Especially when you think about early stage companies, because you have so many opportunities these days. It's not like the old world where basically you had a software product and you had a couple of options. Option one is you sold through a hardware company, what's called OEM, right? You got your Intel inside, or you wound up on the shelf. And some of you are old enough to remember, perhaps, where you went into places like Circuit City and Best Buy and Micro Center, which I don't know if that's still there, but probably one of the most famous places here in the Kendall Square, Cambridge area. You'd literally go to Micro Center and you would buy a box that included a bunch of DVDs, and you would go home and install your Adobe or your Microsoft, and that was just how it was done. So the business model was so different, right? Like, you literally had to think about acquiring shelf space. You had to think about packaging, the box, the size of the box. Is this something that people are going to want to put on their shelves? Is it going to capture someone's attention? And now we live in this entirely different world where all of that is shifted. So the business model definition is important, but your ability to be nimble is even more important. So just thinking about the framework and how we're going to talk about today. So when we think about the definition of a business model, it really describes the rationale of how an organization creates, delivers, and captures value. And ultimately, revenue, right? The value may not just be revenue. There's lots of other ways to think about value. Sometimes value is derived and measured in other terms, like data. Perhaps the client is producing data, providing data to the company, and the data ultimately becomes the value. Other times it's strictly a transaction. But when you think about the framework, the revenue generation plan, and the value delivery method, it's really critical to go through those and think about what is acceptable already in your industry, and what are some of the new ways that people are thinking of tackling problems. So I like to think about this as sort of a canvas. And when you think about sort of the way the world operates, we all have different things in our lives that drive us to make purchasing decisions. And those purchasing decisions sometimes are really, really big. It might be buying a car or a house or a condominium, or it might be booking a around the world vacation. But each of those decisions, based on our own appetite for risk, based on our own budget, very often forces us into a particular business model. So somebody going out to buy a luxury watch may not think about buying something online. They want to go into shops and try it on, and they want to, really get the full experience, versus somebody that just wants to buy, they want to buy their new updated Casio, watch for running, or their Apple Watch. Just buy it online. It shows up at your house. So both of those types of companies do the same thing. They sell timepieces. However, you may be selling directly a competitor to one of those, and you have to think about, do I go the traditional method? Do I sell through retail, or do I try a different method to wind up selling? So if we look at this sort of canvas, it's fascinating. You think about, what are the pieces that I have to incorporate into my business model? Right? So cost structure is certainly one of them. That's always a big one, right? the value proposition. What's the ultimate value to the client? What are the key resources I have to put in place? What partners do I need to put in place? Do I need to have sales, marketing, distribution, OEM channels? Do I have to think about attending the same type of trade shows and conferences and budgeting appropriately for that? I mean, there's some industries that literally lived on conferences that no longer even exist anymore. Then you have other types of industries that never even thought of a conference. And now, you look at the Mobile World Congress with 100 and something thousand people, 200,000 people a year attending the Mobile World Congress, or the Web Summit in Europe. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. Those conferences didn't exist at one point, and now they literally have hundreds of thousands of people attending. So all of the vendors, the suppliers, the partners, the channels, all of those need to come around that business model. So that's really important to think about. What are the key components here? And when you're thinking about your business model, are you covering enough of this pie to really be confident that you're going to achieve your ultimate goal, which is getting the product in the hands of someone that will use it, someone that will pay for it? So some of the models that we're going to talk about today, like for case studies and so forth, I've highlighted the big four up top here. If you could think of other ones, by all means, throw them out. And as I said, the fun part about this class is that every few years it completely changes. Sort of the subscription model is something, there's no question in my mind that was not even on the table, Joe, when we first started doing this class years ago. I mean, what the hell was a subscription model? Netflix didn't exist. If we wanted to watch a movie, we would go to Blockbuster. I mean, the closest thing to a subscription was probably a gym membership or a magazine subscription. And now we live in this incredibly weird world where we own nothing, we rent everything. So you've got the subscription model, which is a way like companies like Netflix and Spotify have essentially been able to aggregate customers and reduce the point of entry. I mean, think about that. This is why, like, for years, people bought cars in cash. Then banks said, well, why don't we lend people money to buy the cars? And then sophisticated financing came in and said, why buy the car? Why not set up a leasing structure? And that's essentially the renting of that vehicle. And now, most people I know, especially people that live in cities, they don't even own a car. They have a zip car if they want to wind up jumping into a car. They Uber around where they need to, or taxi, or public transportation. But the concept of owning a $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 car, $3,000 a year in insurance, maintenance, all of the other things is just bizarre to them. When I was growing up, I mean, all you could think about when you're, especially as a 18 or 20-year-old guy, you're like, I can't wait to get a car, right? And I want to get a nicer car. Now I talk to people that are in their 20s and 30s, they're like, why would I buy a car? It's just, the concept has completely shifted, and the industry has had to shift as well. You look at companies, one of the big European car companies, Renault. Renault right now has partnered with another really cool company in Spain a few years back, and they essentially have the equivalent of a Zipcar all around the country. Essentially, Renault figured out a new way to get their cars out of the factory and onto the road without having to go out and find one client at a time through dealerships, etc. Look at Carvana as an example. I mean, they completely turned upside down the entire idea of buying a car. It's just phenomenal, isn't it? Go ahead.
Why is that not done in the United States?
Yeah.
Find that one customer. So why is that not
I
everywhere
think
here?
Zipcar is probably the closest. I don't know how big Zipcar is anymore.
Car that you're going
Exactly,
to get.
yeah.
So why is that not everywhere here? Like, I want a BMW, but I don't want to pay for one. So let me just be part of the BMW club, and we all just go drive around these BMWs that we all share.
I love that idea. I mean, that is, yeah. And if you were running an auto company, you were looking to put 10,000 more cars a year on the road, or 100,000 more, creating a subscription type model might be a fantastic way of doing it. And it's the sharing economy, right? Because it's not leasing. Leasing is quasi subscription, but it's that's still an individual one-off consumer experience. I am leasing to you, and you signed a 36-month lease, 12,000 miles a year, blah, blah, blah. Whereas the Zipcar concept or the Renault concept in Spain, there's a different driver in that car all of the time. You have a question?
I think the corollary I'd make to that is Tesla's robotaxi attempt.
Yes.
It feels much like that's the same version of the thing, but in a different marketplace and done in a different way. And so I think I'm curious about what dynamics are different that it had to show up in a different way in this place.
And it's driven by so many weird things too, right? Like there's, and I don't know the answer, I'm not gonna pretend to, but maybe in Spain, it just worked better that way, right? Because you've got Renault who wanted to enter a particular market. Sales were not going up, but people needed cars, especially people in cities. Maybe the regulations, maybe the insurance made more sense than it would in other areas. Who knows? But this is the beauty of entrepreneurship, right? It's like you find that niche, you come up with that very cool idea, and then you just do everything you can to figure out how do I make a difference? What can I do to actually scale something? I mean, Uber we don't use it anymore, but it was one of the case studies we used for a couple of years. I mean, all of us take Uber like for granted. I mean, it's the most mind-boggling concept. When Uber first came out, I mean, it was just so weird. We're actually getting in someone's vehicle. They own that vehicle. Like they bring their kids to soccer in that vehicle. They drive to school in that vehicle. They go grocery shopping in that vehicle. But oh, by the way, 3 days a week between X and Y, they're on the Uber platform and they're picking up people at the airport and delivering luggage. It's what a wild concept. And if you think about Uber is probably one of the greatest stories next to Airbnb from a standpoint of scalability, right? Like just how those companies have scaled. I mean, Airbnb controls, however you want to define that, more bedrooms than any hotel group in the world times like 5. If you looked at the number of rooms controlled by Bonvoy, right? And Bonvoy is the merger, you had in the old days Starwood. Starwood was the big corporation that owned Sheraton, W Hotels, and a litany of others, 4 Points by Sheraton. And then you had the Marriott Group that owned all the Marriotts and a whole litany of other hotels. And those two who then merged, they still don't have a fraction of the rooms of Airbnb. And Airbnb doesn't own any real estate. How nuts is that? Uber doesn't own any cars. How wacky is that? You could add up the total amount of cars that Uber has access to. They don't need to own them. And I don't know what the real number is. I'm not going to guess, but it's probably damn near bigger than Avis, Hertz, and National combined. How cool is that? But where I think that's most impressive about those companies is not only that they came up with a phenomenal business model at the right time, the whole concept of the sharing economy took place, but they went head to head with unions, regulators, governments, insurance companies. I mean, the budget that they spent, each of those companies, especially Uber, in their first 5 years on legal fees, litigation alone, absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, I invest in companies. It would have to be a really compelling pitch for somebody to tell me they're raising X amount for their company and they expect 30% of it to be on litigation. That would just seem insane. But that's how they did it. And think about some of the great Uber stories in places like Paris where the taxi unions are so powerful, they were burning and flipping over Ubers. You've got other cities who have banned Ubers altogether. I mean, head to head. I mean, Airbnb, they had an incredible run. And now all of these governments, because of, who do you think it is? How many cities and states have now come out against Airbnb trying to stop Airbnb or Airbnb equivalents? Mm-hmm. And where they couldn't stop them, they have put these whacked out regulations in place. Yeah. Where, if you happen to own an apartment in Boston or in New York, Yeah, you can Airbnb it. Minimum 30 days. So the whole concept of Airbnb was great because I could be going to New York and I need to be near a convention center. The hotels near there are $900 a night or sold out. And I can wind up staying in a cool apartment for $300. Not anymore. They put in these restrictions. Constant battles just to get to the people that want your product. How crazy is that? Who do you think it is behind all of these fights with Airbnb? The hotel groups, the hotel unions, the hotel groups.
Incumbents.
They're like, this is crazy. Like, people are not staying at my Sheraton for $575 a night. They're staying down the street in a 2-bedroom apartment for $300 a night. And then on top of it, you know, hotels make all of these fake fees now, right? So they've got, how many of us have stayed in a hotel recently? You wind up, you know, it's $299 a night. You're like, okay, that's fine. And then you're like, yeah, of course it's taxes. And then you find out there's a tourist tax of 10% added onto it. And then, you know, the new thing about the resort fees, which I think definitely Congress will be addressing at some point, has become almost comical that there's these hidden $45 or $50 resort fees, and it is not a resort. It's like a city hotel. But think about the concept there, right? Airbnb and our friends at Uber that literally transformed an entire industry and did so while not technology problems, right? Having to fight unions, litigators, lawyers, accountants, multi-billion-dollar companies, trying to crush them and put them away. I mean, you have to have a pretty versatile business model to survive. And boy, they both have survived. Question, yeah?
I'll ask first.
Oh,
Thanks.
you got it. Go ahead.
Along the same lines, when you think about industry-defining innovation such as blockchain, from your experience, where on the canvas do you first see the change from the business model standpoint?
Where on the canvas?
Yes.
So I'm not sure I completely understand the question because maybe I'm thinking it through the lens of blockchain. Right? Because blockchain's not really an industry, right? It's a technology.
Capitalize off of that.
Yeah, you know, I think there's not one answer because it depends on sort of where that new technology or innovation is coming from. Blockchain to me is somewhat similar, not obviously as impactful, but as AI, right? Where blockchain's not a company, right? No one says, I'm a blockchain company. Okay, you are, what the hell do you use the blockchain for, right? It's like, I'm an AI company, all right? Is it an AI company for healthcare? Is it an AI company, you know, what is it? Where do you fit within the landscape? But I do think that very often, new technology very often arrives, and then really smart people like the ones in this room are either the developers of the technology or those that figure out what problem they can solve with that technology that no one ever thought of. I mean, that's sort of the marriage that is so beautiful. I mean, I'll give you an example you may have heard of, and I'll use it because I think this class talks. You ever hear of the company Brontes? Is that one of your case studies? No. So there's a company, this is going back to the days when I was part of the judging of the MIT Business Plan competition. A company called Brontes was developed, and super smart guys that had all of this technology around imaging, visualization, 3D imaging, and they were looking, I mean, really cool stuff, way ahead of its time. And their idea was, we're going to wind up having this really cool camera, and there's software behind the camera that's going to be able to allow us to do things like facial recognition, stuff that we take for granted now, but this was very novel back then. And this can be used in all of these, and they sort of presented to us all these different models, you know, airport security, and, you know, malls could use it because then if people opted in, you know, when they were seen on the screen, you know, their phone would suddenly get a ping that says, oh, by the way, there's 30% off at Gap, and you happen to be walking through the mall and there's Gap. There was all of these great ideas, right? I mean, military, security, retail, a gazillion really cool ideas, right? And the technology itself was so good and so versatile, but they weren't really sure, where is this going to work? And one of the guys Eric Paley. He was down visiting family in Florida, and his I think the story is that his wife's brother, Eric's sister, husband and wife live in Florida. He's a dentist. She does something else. He's there for the week, and he joins the brother-in-law at a dental conference, which sounds excruciatingly boring. And for all of us that like technology, that is not an industry that has embraced technology, right? So, unlike neurosurgeons and vascular surgeons and others, the dental office almost looks exactly the same as it did when I was a kid. And maybe there's a few other cool tools, but kind of the same, and the same terrible sounds and inconvenience. And so you've got this cool MIT technology dude with a brain towards like imaging, and you've got his dentist brother-in-law sort of checking out what's happening there for his practice. And they come around and they're talking to a company that did essentially back then, whitening trays and false teeth. For people that needed a whitening tray or false teeth or something, they would give you this disgusting little goo, and you would bite into it, and it was like biting into a combination of sort of sand and mud at the same time. And then they would take it out of your mouth, it would harden, and they would send it to some factory somewhere, and then they would make your whitening trays, and they would mail those to your house. And he's like, that is just dumb. What if we could take my 3D visualization imaging technology and do a map of your mouth? They went back, sat down, and figured out how to put the camera on the end of a pen, and essentially were able to map the entire inside of the mouth. And then they had to go back to their investors and say, I know what you bought and how cool and sexy that sounds, but we think we can completely change the way these dentists operate. And this is a huge part of the dental industry, right? Implants, all sorts of things need a mold. And long story short, they got the approval from their board. They went ahead, completely crushed it in that space. And they were acquired by 3M for an obscene amount of money. Like, how cool is that? Right? Like, no one saw that coming. The ability to change the business model, to use that mind, that entrepreneurial and that technology mind, and think, wow, I think this could work. What a neat idea. So business models need to change. And as you were talking about things like blockchain or AI, these guys were kind of like imaging technology. Lots of potential applications, but until you find one that people are really willing to pay for, that solves a really important problem, it's hard to have an impact. So any other quick questions before we bounce along?
Rich, I have a question for you,
great.
kind of in two parts. One would be, I think, talking about business model changes. In my career, I've worked for multiple organizations that have undergone the conversion from perpetual software licensing to subscription. And in the industry, as you know, perpetual licensing is a dead model, right? One of the questions that I would just love your insight and thinking on is what was so fundamentally flawed about that business model that it has just been entirely subsumed by subscription? And then what threats to the models that you have on the board should founders be considering from day one in selecting one?
Yeah, great question. I think the big threat that was against sort of the basically buy it, sort of licensing model was one piece of it was the upfront cost. Right? It's the idea that I had to go in and spend $599 to get Microsoft, whatever it was called back then. That was just a price point. So then what Microsoft did, because they were smart, they chose a few of these, right? So Microsoft used OEM channels, so they would partner with Dell, and they would put a really scaled down version of Office on Dell computers. So at least you had Word, PowerPoint, and a couple of other things, but they weren't really full function. That allowed them to at least get people to, get a taste of it, but you still had to go out and buy then a $199 package And very often, you're trading in your PC, you're getting rid of it. So it's like you're paying $200, $300, $400, maybe $600 for the full package, and you might only have that PC for 2 years. And then, so you've got a barrier to entry, but I'm talking about right now just at the consumer level, right? We're talking B2C. Then you go to the B2B level where Microsoft salespeople are going out to, companies like John Hancock, MIT, and saying, oh, by the way, we're going to sell you an enterprise license, right? And it's 2.5 million up front, up to X amount of users. Then, all of your professors get it, and you've got 4,000 professors or whatever the number is, and they're all going to get it on their machine, and that's going to cost $200 a machine, right? So that was a hard sale, and for the person selling that, I mean, this could be a year-long, 2-year-long sales cycle. And then the other piece of it, right? So you had the barrier to entry, right? One of the things we're going to talk about in one of my slides is the stickiness piece of it. You had the barrier to entry piece, but you also had the sales cycle piece, which is a freaking nightmare. Because, think about it. If your company is using, let's say, QuickBooks, and somebody comes into your company, you've got 1,200 employees, and a big finance and accounting department, they're trying to sell you an entirely different accounting package. You're thinking to yourself, number one, the barrier to entry is the price, but also I now have switching costs. I got to port all of this data over. So that was the real challenge. And years ago, when people were using Linux and they were using other types of technology, right? Unix, right? Unix shops, which then were replaced by Microsoft NT, and you had Linux, you had these. It was a massive commitment. So the company not only had the high barrier to entry, they also had the switching cost was incredibly high. They knew that if they moved to this platform, there was no escape. Like, you bought everything. You couldn't say 2 years later, I'm out of here. We're not going to use that platform any longer. So companies that were Apple shops were Apple shops, right? It's kind of like people with phones. You're an Apple phone or you're an Android phone. And the idea of just swapping back and forth is very difficult when you start to talk about an enterprise level. And as entrepreneurs, you have to think about that. Like, if we marry this particular business model, this pricing structure, this sales cycle, these partnership channels, like, we're kind of married to it. And we need to make sure our customers feel comfortable enough that making that decision is a good one. Right? So switching to the subscription model certainly helped, right? Because it removed the barrier to entry. And the internet and other things have obviously given us the ability to now instantly download software that before needed to be mailed. You had to manufacture disks, et cetera. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
It does, yeah. And I think the second part of that was these. I guess the question is, do you see any the second part of that was, do you see any present threats that you think we should be aware of in thinking through these models that might be some similar disruption, right? The act of going from perpetual licensing to subscription was very disruptive for a business. As we're thinking about selecting these, are there anything that you see looming in the future that might be a similar disruption?
One of the areas where I think that there is the potentiality for significant disruption is when you have big companies that build closed systems, and those closed systems catch on. As an example, if you, not so much the problem anymore, obviously, but years ago, if you made a commitment that you were going to be an Apple person, right? You're a Mac user. That was a completely closed system. You had to use all of their products or none. Like, there was no optionality. You couldn't just download Microsoft Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Adobe. There were imaging technologies. There were other programs you just couldn't even play with because it was a closed system. And my concern right now that we're seeing in the industry, because of AI and because of lots of new technologies around that, you're seeing companies that are building closed systems. So you have closed systems, which can be great if you can own the system, right? Like, if you're the one that owns it and you're able to scale dramatically, good. I mean, if you get really, really big, let the government deal with it from an antitrust perspective. But that becomes a real either positive if you're on the right side of it, or a very big negative to the entire startup community. I mean, once you have a closed system, it essentially becomes hands off to the rest of the world. Right? Think about the airlines industry. Think about big industries, telecommunications. Those are essentially, or were at some point, completely closed systems. I mean, no one started a new telecom company in the 90s or 2000s. I mean, it was just unheard of. They were all consolidating. They were so closed, and they were able to push everyone away. So I think that that's something to be very aware of in the AI world is your company going to be operating in an open system where people can build things and plug in and have more operability, right? So essentially, you are leveraging the standards that exist in the industry. Or do you want a completely closed system where this is very specialized for a particular audience? And that's incredible, right? You know, it works. There's really not a bad or a good, but it's kind of, you have to think about, where do you stand? Closed systems are great when it's brand new innovation technology and you have a lot of money and a lot of power. Open source systems are really great when you're trying to build tools that'll latch onto something else, or you want contribution, right? Think about the App Store is a good example of that. The App Store initially was a completely closed system. It was very, very difficult. Obviously, antitrust and other things got in the way and sort of changed that, and they've had to loosen a lot of their rules. But that's a closed system. If you had an Android phone, you had an Apple phone, I mean, there were apps and games, other things that you just could not, they were not on the same platform because it was a closed system. So I think that's a consideration, right? For me anyways, and I'm sure other people here might be able to come up with other ideas of things that are on the horizon. A question in the back?
Market research, and I found out that the younger population is turning against subscription models. So what do you recommend?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, what do you recommend from a standpoint of trying to sell to that population?
Yes, I would like to sell that population, but when I mention a subscription model, they cringe and are automatically turned off.
That's awesome. We got a free concert tonight. So I guess my first question is, right, is what is it about the subscription model that bothers them, right? Because just saying, oh, we don't like subscription models, right? It's like saying, I don't like to buy a car. Okay, so do you hate cars? No, I like cars. Do you want to drive cars? Yes, I just don't want to own a car. Okay, so it's not really a car problem. It's how you utilize that, right? So if they've got, if anyone is, or any part of an industry decides they don't like a particular subscription model, the question is, well, do you still like the product at the end of the subscription model? And if you still like the product at the end and it's solving something for you, but you don't want to be locked into a subscription, how do we wind up doing that? And lots of industries have solved that problem, right? I mean, one way is the ability to walk away from the subscription.
Okay.
Many years ago, I mean, very low-tech industry, but think about the health club industry years ago. I mean, you went in, you signed a contract. It was a 1-year, 2-year contract. It was X amount of dollars a month. It was almost impossible to cancel if you in the little fine wording, it would say, the only way you could cancel is if you provide something in writing that demonstrates you've moved farther than 50 miles away from the closest whatever fitness center. And people were just like, this is just dumb. Like, we're not doing this. So those older companies, Bally's and others, they held on to that and got completely crushed by Planet Fitness and all of these other ones that said, don't worry, no contracts. If you do sign for a year, it's less money, or you could just go month to month, whatever you like. Right? So I think the real question is not do you like subscription or not, it's what is the product at the end? Is it solving a big enough problem? And can you figure out a new way of delivering it to the customer?
Thank you so much.
Great. Let me bounce through a few of these and we'll do some more questions. So different industries, sub-industries, et cetera, are always fun to talk about, and we've done that so far today. But I wanted to give case studies. So case studies to me are a blast. Netflix is always, has become really one of my favorite. I mentioned before, and probably 50% of this room has no idea what I'm talking about, but date night was Friday after work, driving to the local plaza and going to Blockbuster And the average Blockbuster was the size of like the average CVS, had aisles, same probably shelving, and you walked up and down to find a movie, right? Or you would say, oh, I'm in the mood for a comedy. You go to the comedy section, and you will look at the boxes on the shelf. And back then, in the old days, it was videotapes, VHS type tapes, and then it went to DVDs. And you would get it, you bring it up to, you get your 3 movies for the upcoming snowy weekend, which we may be having this coming weekend. And you would check out, and that was incredible. That was like super cool. It's like, oh my God, I can actually see a movie that was out 6 months ago or a year ago. I could see it at home. I got 3 movies at home. Fantastic. And then you ran like hell to get back to that plaza in order to return the video, because if you didn't, you got charged a late fee. It was like X amount. I mean, because they had a limited inventory. That little thing had to go through the slot in the door, and be time stamped, or you were going to get hit with a charge. But that was the coolest company. I mean, Blockbuster exploded internationally. I mean, they were freaking everywhere. Who remembers Blockbuster? Thank God. All right. At least I don't feel that old. That was almost half of you. Well, Netflix, said that's stupid. Now there's this thing called DVDs, right? Like, why don't I just mail it to you? And I don't need to put the big plastic thing. Basically, you go onto your dial-up modem, you go to their website, and you check off the ones that you want. They have a factory somewhere, or multiple factories, that were literally printing DVDs. So it wasn't like walking into the Blockbuster in Kendall Square and, oh, they're out of Rain Man. I guess we'll pick another movie. No, they were never out of anything, because they would just print more and more. They would slide into a little red and white envelope. It would show up to your house in a day and a half, and you could keep it for a month. They didn't care. If you didn't return it, you were going to get charged. It was just ingenious. Blockbuster could not have gone out of business faster. I mean, it was almost like a race. I mean, they were like, holy shit, we didn't see that coming. I mean, it was crazy. Like this, I mean, all of us had our Blockbuster membership card. I mean, it was kind of like a library card. That was the only way you were going to get through the cash register. I mean, it was amazing. Failure to see that business model coming, but even a failure to effectively copy it. Exactly. That's the big question, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of Harvard and MIT case studies out there about what was wrong with them. Part of the problem is they were so deeply entrenched within a particular model that it's very hard to switch. Because if you think about, they were essentially renting movies for a particular price. That price and all the fees and everything else needed to actually cover the cost of staff, licensing, equipment, and real estate. So they had tens of millions of square foot of Blockbuster on 5-year and 10-year leases all around. And that debt, they couldn't get out of those contracts. There was no way to make that debt disappear. When a brand new plaza opens up, there'd be a Blockbuster on one end, a CVS on the other. Those were the anchor tenants. And a bunch of other noise in the middle, karate studio and a hair salon and other stuff. But those anchor tenants were there, and they were in 10, 20-year leases. And it absolutely crushed the business. So that's a really cool story. But what Netflix has done is the coolest story, right? I mean, you went from competing against Blockbuster to now, if anybody told me that, yeah, someday they're going to be competing against Disney, Warner Brothers. What do you mean? They're going to produce movies? Why, I thought they just rented movies. No, they're going to make their own movies. How insane is that? So they now have become one of the most powerful forces in the world when it comes to the entertainment business. They've won awards in every possible category. So the ability for them to not only make an incredible business, right? Like they could have all done well and continue to do well, just crushing Blockbuster and moving from DVDs to streaming, right? Because the reason they were doing DVDs, obviously, is none of us had the bandwidth to download a movie. And if you did download a movie, it would take 4 hours to download a 90-minute movie. So that wasn't a problem. They just said, we'll send you the DVD. Instant gratification when that DVD went into the player. But then when bandwidth picked up, all of a sudden, the DVD slowly dropped off. And I think it was just, someone here could probably Google it. I think it was literally a year or two ago, they shipped their last DVD. Somebody must Google this for us. I think it was a year or two ago. Yeah, they shipped their last DVD. Because there was parts, you know, especially in the United States, where there's parts of the US that just did not have. But now everybody's covered, right? I mean, if you don't have really good high-speed internet at home through the traditional providers, you know, Elon Musk will provide it for you effortlessly. So that's another example that they themselves not only invented an industry sector, but they then moved into streaming before anybody was thinking about streaming. I mean, how do we all see movies before Netflix streaming? Another subscription model still exists today. HBO, Showtime, right? You would wind up paying stupid amounts of money to HBO, and you know, you would have HBO, but I would have Showtime. So, you know, for the right movie, you would come over to my place, and I would go to your house, and you know, it's just completely shifted thanks to Netflix moving to streaming, but then obviously moving into the movie studio business. And I thought this was great to sort of look at their canvas. And you look at really where the value proposition is, right? Users can stream 24/7, minimum amount of ads. How do you control the amount of ads? You pay a higher subscription price, right? Ingenious. Oh, you want to pay this much per month? No problem. You see less ads. Somebody that doesn't want to pay that, they just want free Netflix all the time, they have a lot of ads. So that differential in revenue is paid for by the advertising. There's zero real estate. So phenomenal model. Think about how you can wind up moving a business that exists today. Think about how many industries exist today that are literally stuck in time and have not changed in a number of years. And because of AI, because of higher speed streaming, because of new technologies, new materials, wow, I could change that industry or that product. Just to move along, we're watching our time a little bit. The Apple business model is always a lot of fun to look at. I'm going to do like a little Apple and then sort of a Alphabet thing because they're two most valuable companies like on planet Earth, up there with NVIDIA. But the Apple business model has shifted dramatically, right? What did Apple do when they first started under Steve Jobs? They built computers, right? Cool, quirky. Their biggest customers were academics. So schools basically had gazillions of Apple computers. And then they got into the entire sort of design world. So every architectural firm, design firm, web development firm, you name it, had an Apple computer because Apple was doing cool, fun stuff that, you know, just PCs running Microsoft just couldn't do, or a PC running even like Unix just couldn't do, didn't have all the user interface and all those other things. But again, think about it. Where does Apple make all their money now? Sure as hell is not selling computers. So take a look at their model. You think about the old model was very simple. They had products, they sold them through channels. What were the channels? Direct to consumer, retail, etc., and then the customers. That was the model. It was really, really simple. Now, Apple completely changed their model. What did they sell? Services. They created a thing called the App Store, a closed system that basically turned, you know, take your iPhone, you think about it, like, my kids think this is funny, but we actually used to use phones to make phone calls. They have no idea what that means. Like, they'll just, I'll text you. I mean, no, just call me. No, I will text you. They have no concept of the idea that that's all that device used to do. And it would occasionally do text. You know, back in the flip phone days was fun because you had to like learn this special algorithm to like AA, B, C, C, D. That was all it did. A phone was a phone was a phone. But then Apple said, wait a minute. Maybe if we make a phone that does more cool shit, people will become more addicted to their phone. And the more cool stuff that the phone can do, the higher the switching cost. And the other genius thing about Apple, right? I don't know what the number is, but they haven't developed 99.9% of the apps. So they get the rest of the world to become their engineering team. How freaking cool is that? It's like, hey, we built this little thing. It's basically a freaking paperweight. It has a camera on it and you can call people. And we want to do a whole bunch of cool stuff. We want to have apps where I can wind up meeting new people, apps where I can basically find new business connections. I want apps where I can book flights. I'm not going to build any of that shit. You guys are. And you're going to do it in my closed system. And that became the App Store. And that ultimately has driven them to a point where the amount of money they make through the App Store overshadows every other part of their business. Then you took the phone, right? And you then integrated it with a whole bunch of other cool stuff. So now you get the Apple Watch, you get the Apple whatever. It's absolutely incredible when you think about how a company that was just selling computers, and they could have easily gone out of business just like Gateway Computers and so many others had. But they said, no. We're building an ecosystem. And that ecosystem is going to include all of these peripherals, all of these other cool things. So that is, every decision there was a business model. And some have succeeded, some have failed, but that's pretty impressive. So look at the new model right now, which is services, subscribers, and experiences, not a piece of hardware. The hardware is basically secondary. It's worthless compared to, I mean, if you think about it, if I wiped all of the apps off of your phone, I mean, would you carry it around every day? I mean, it seems awfully heavy and big just to make phone calls. But you put all that stuff on it. I got my banking information on it. I've got 18,000 photos on it. I mean, all of a sudden, the switching cost is so high. And I mean, most of us, I mean, I'd rather lose my wallet to my phone most of the time. I mean, it's panic time if you can't find your phone. I mean, that is elegant. What a business model. Total addiction. It's like crack cocaine. Alphabet is such a crazy story because, of course, it's newly named Alphabet. You have a question?
About the apps.
Yeah.
You buy an app, there's a percentage that go to Apple. But if the app is free, like Instagram or a free app, how do they make money?
You guys know. So how do you make money? Through the advertising. So they get a percentage of revenue from the app. So it's not as simple as I build an app. I build a new app and it's $9.99 on the App Store. It's a new fitness app. Apple gets a piece of that. But Apple also gets a piece of all the upsell. So I got you to do the 30-day free trial, right? I'm now pinging your credit card $9.99 a month. You love my app. And now I'm going to upsell you to $14.99 a month because you're going to have these other features. And the same is true for the free apps, right? The Facebooks and the Instagrams. There is a revenue share associated with all of that advertisement. I was literally just talking to somebody about this the other day. The amount of ads that you now see on Instagram is absolutely incredible. And again, sort of, sub pieces of business models. Ads were ads, right? It was like, bing, it showed up, it annoyed you, it went away. Now, ads are videos. Ads are entertaining. Sometimes the ads are more entertaining than what you were looking at originally. So that model alone is worth exploring, right? How do you make the ads as entertaining as the content that you paid for? It's absolutely incredible. I mean, Instagram now, and we all know how all these things are integrated. I mean, you wind up Googling, I'm looking for vacations in Hawaii, and before you know it, ads on Instagram are starting to show vacations in Hawaii. Because of all that fine print and all those agreements and all those free apps we download, give permission for them to understand they're connected to your search, et cetera. So it's absolutely phenomenal, closed system, and it all does start with search. I remember when Google first came out, and again, dating myself, but it's fun to think about, like, search was boring. It was like the only way we could all figure out this crazy big ass thing called the internet. Like, went to Alta Vista, or I don't know how, you guys could probably, there was a bunch of other ones, right? There was Alta Vista, there was Yahoo. What was another one? My God, Netscape was the original. That's how Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz, which is now called something A16, one of the most successful, largest venture capital funds in the world. That's how Mark became a billionaire. He created Netscape. And basically they were just all competing on algorithms. That was it. It was like, if I type in car dealer near me, what search engine's gonna, or history of Martin Luther King Jr., which one was gonna provide better results? And it was kind of just a boring business, but a necessity. And they all had the vision that sooner or later, people are gonna become addicted to our search engine and we will have advertising. And then Google just crushed them, absolutely crushed them. And now, I mean, we don't have to, it's kind of like back in the days, Kleenex. If somebody hands you a tissue, you called it a Kleenex. If somebody said make a copy of this, they used to say make a Xerox of this. Because that company was so synonymous with that activity. Now, if you're searching, people say, will you Google this? Even if you're using Firefox or something else. And then, of course, out of that came Alphabet. And when you take a look at where their revenues are coming from, not geographically, but by service sector, the revenue from advertising is completely off the charts. And part of the reason is they know so much about every customer, every user, that it's incredible. I mean, years ago, there was no such thing as signing into Google. Like, that didn't exist. You downloaded the Google app or you put it on your computer. That was basically your search engine / browser. Now you can't use anything without being signed into, right? And that signing in then gives them power to know lots of things about you, which they then can sell to advertisers. So they're 10 steps ahead of us now. So the advertising revenue is absolutely incredible. And then, of course, they bought YouTube and countless other organizations. And now Alphabet as a whole is probably one of the most powerful companies in the world. I mean, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, buys data from them, search data, in order to predict sicknesses in different parts of the world. They will buy data simply to figure out what the hell is going to happen next. So if all of a sudden the number of searches in Portland, Oregon starts to increase, and then they see a bunch of blips in Seattle of people searching, headache, runny nose, aches, pains, guess what? It's a cluster of them. Now all of a sudden CDC and other organizations now know the flu has finally hit that part of the US, or this particular problem is increasing. So that then becomes this trickle down. Think about it. CVS, Walgreens, they now know that in this part of the United States, we are stocking up on NyQuil and all of these other things. That is magic. I mean, just think about that. At some level, it's a little scary. But being able to see the flow of search can tell you so much about the future, not the past. It tells you about the future. So think about this. Who's heard of Palantir? One of the smartest, scariest companies in the world. I used to work, so I kind of, in my little story, I shared about sort of running companies and then now doing this fund. There was a little 2-year window where I worked for a big hedge fund in Connecticut called Bridgewater. And I worked with Ray and that whole team there. And I think at the time we were paying Palantir, it was $2 or $3 million a month for data. Why the hell were we doing that? Well, I think it was about, it was like 30 million a year we paid Palantir, which didn't matter. I mean, they had 100 billion under management, right? Huge hedge fund. Well, they were dealing with things like currencies and commodities. And they would buy data from private as well as public sources. One of the greatest examples was the Arab Spring. That all of a sudden, we wouldn't know that here, and neither would CNN. Palantir was able to track that more and more searches, more and more YouTube, more and more, I guess, whatever the video service was before Zoom, Skype, was being used in this particular region in the Middle East. And people were uploading, back then it was very small snippets of videos. So they were able to see this before other governments realized that there is something brewing. There is shit going on in Egypt and in these other places that none of us saw, right? There was no missiles flying. There was nothing happening. It was the people on the streets sending messages to their friends and family or videos of this is what's happening in Cairo. Like, holy shit, like this, they're talking about overthrowing the government. And that blip, right, in the biotech world we call it, that biomarker started to actually form into a much bigger blip. And companies like Bridgewater, like big finance companies, started making bets. Interesting. Civil uprising, getting worse. Then it started happening in other countries in that area, other cities. And then you start to think about, well, how do we play this out? So they would play the game. We used to play this game of, basically gaming the theory, right? Which is, what are the second and third order consequences? What are the second and third order consequences of this? So let's say all of this shit just fizzles out, just dies off, like these things often do. Okay, do we make currency moves? Do we not? What if this thing explodes and they literally overthrow the government? Well, what happens at that point in the region? Do people suddenly start fleeing Egypt and moving into other regions? Do the Syrians start moving into Turkey? How does that impact the Turkish currency? How does that impact military use in that region? You can start to think very quickly that if all of a sudden these things start to happen, you can make incredible hedges on currencies. I can devalue the shit out of the Egyptian currency in 2.5 seconds. I can start investing more in military-based companies, intelligence companies in the Middle East than anyone had ever thought about. And I'm doing this before it's on CNN. So the prediction of the future is a business model. And Palantir has certainly capitalized on that. And Google, and I shared with you sort of the CDC story, the power of the data, think about that. It's not a piece of hardware. It's nothing you actually sell directly that someone takes home. The power of the data they're collecting far exceeds the value of the company. Absolutely incredible. All right, Apple versus Alphabet. I'm going to skip through some of these, but it's always fun to sort of watch these guys because they know exactly what they're doing. But to grow a company from 10 million to 20 million, that's a nice percentage-wise multiple, but it's not a big deal. To grow a company when it's already doing billions by double-digit percentages in market cap, sales, everything else, that is mind-boggling. I mean, look at any long-haul company. Look at Ford, General Motors. Look at American Airlines. Look at some of these, Steelcase, companies like this. I mean, they go up by 3.5% in 1 year. Like, they're throwing parties. These companies own so much data and have so much power, they're able to take their valuations by double in literally a 5-year period of time. Think about that. Apple, from 2 billion to 4 billion in a 5-year period of time. Alphabet, 1 to 4 billion. So what is going on there? It's hundreds of business models and thousands of points of technology that are adding value to the world. Just to skip along, MedTech, we'll talk a little bit about at another time. Digital, of course, is where we talked about the sharing economy. AI is really where a lot of this is at. And this is a fun slide because it's sort of the closed loop economy. I love this slide. Someone else, I did not make this. But you think about how a lot of the big companies that we know, and some of whom that you may not know or that didn't exist literally 10 years ago, are right now at the forefront of the entire AI economy. So when you're thinking about how do I fit into this, right? How do I think about how does Anthropic connect with CoreWeave versus how do they connect with the data centers, right? You have so many data centers being built right now worldwide. Well, that's great. That's the data center business. But what about the heating, cooling of those particular buildings? What about the securitization of the data within those buildings? I mean, the number of new companies that are going to be created just to support this insane economy around AI, it's absolutely magnificent. There will be more millionaires created, millionaires and billionaires, but millionaires created in the next 3 to probably 7 years than have been created in the past 25 years. That's the elegance of being able to figure out how to harness technology and find a business model that works for whatever subsector you're in, whether it's in healthcare or anything else. Pitfalls to overcome, I'm going to skip that and go right to this. This is sort of something to think about, right? And I'm not going to beat this to death. And it deliberately has a lot of information on it. And this guy, Brian, is phenomenal. I follow him on LinkedIn, and I love the stuff that he puts up there. And he put up this slide, and I was like, that's so good. I was like, what can I borrow from that? And then I was like, it's just such a good slide, I'm not going to touch it. Take a picture of it, Google his name, you'll get the slide. It is such an elegant way of saying that each of these companies, right? Lululemon, Facebook, Intuit, Oracle, Adobe, these companies that are benefiting from different types of switching costs. It's absolutely outstanding. So take a picture of that and think about that when you are at the point of thinking about the business model. How do we get the customer to stay loyal to us and to keep coming back and continue to use that product or that particular service? So takeaways, adaptability is key. I think I've said that a little bit. Customer-centric approach. Great question that came from the back earlier was like, hey, there's a trend towards people not liking subscription models. Okay, but let's forget about the model. Do they like the product at the end of the model? You have to have a customer. So whatever the hell you're doing needs to have a customer-centric approach. If somebody is not willing to buy that product and actually write a check and then hopefully write another and write another and write another, your business is it's no different than just a drive-by sort of hair salon in a mall or something. It's like you have new customers every week. Sometimes you have no customers because the weather's bad. That's not a scalable business. And of course, innovate continuously. Thank you guys. Happy to answer any more questions. Good. Any last questions? We have less than 5 minutes left. Go ahead. Yep.
You talked about, so everything was dedicated to business models, but one particular, do you think
Just
about,
speak up a little bit louder. I'm sorry.
when it comes to business models, do you think about customer acquisition?
Complex thing to measure, but it's so important, right? Because if it costs you more to acquire the customer than the value the customer is giving back, you've got to tweak that model, right? You've got to think to yourself, I have to either figure out a new business model to get that product service to the client, or I need to come up with a different revenue stream to offset that loss, right? So if you think about so many of these technology companies over the years, they were operating at a loss for years. I mean, Google some of the awesome interviews with Jeff Bezos, where there's a great interview of him and David Letterman on the Letterman Show, who was one of these late night shows, like a Conan O'Brien type, Jimmy Kimmel type, and Letterman's just like, so you're going to lose more money this year? He's like, yeah, we're going to lose so much money. It's incredible. And Letterman, is just like perplexed. Like, what do you mean? You just keep losing money? Yeah, we're going to keep losing money. And that model worked, right? Because they raised enough venture capital that customer acquisition cost was irrelevant. They didn't give a shit that the cost to acquire a customer was $40 and the customer bought a $19 book that had an 8% margin of profit because they were roping you in. And all of a sudden now, I could buy anything on Amazon. I could buy computers, books, I could buy anything on an Amazon. And it's because they invested so much and lost so much money in the beginning to get me addicted to it that no one can compete, right? So think about customer acquisition costs as critical. And the only time that you really can sort of just take that cost for granted is when you're entering a very existing industry, highly entrenched, you're opening a restaurant, right? Or you're advertising to sell, roofs to houses. You can just, the whole industry operates the same way. You know how much money you have to spend on advertising, what number of clients you're going to get per ad, and what the profit margin is for client. But that's not a majority of the world that we live in. So really important. Thank you for bringing that up. That's something I should put into the slides. One last question, Joe? What do you think? Anybody? Yes?
AI world, all these millionaires, or billionaires that are created, if it's all closed loop and we're not the big companies, how do you compete?
What do you mean? How do you compete against like the
Not
Amazons, the eBays,
How do you get into the same type of market? I mean, if they're creating these closed loop places, right? And how do you get access to the customers or to different things that they're doing? I was thinking like, how's that supposed to work if they're building these?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a matter. It's about differentiation, right? Because you can't be. Yeah, a lot of times it's specialization as well, right? It's finding that niche that people are completely overlooking. I mean, when you think about it, I could open an Amazon shop today, and I can look and find what are the top selling products. If there's products that people are searching for and constantly buying, I'm not going to go head to head with those. I'm going to find something that's slightly unique and hopefully attracts some of those customers away. I mean, it becomes a little bit of a zero-sum game, but I think differentiation, is absolutely critical, because going head to head, same product, same company. I mean, what's your option? Lower price? I mean, that's a terrible business model, in my opinion. I mean, it really needs to be a completely different kind of model, right? How am I going to be able to maintain very good margins and really good customer relationships? I have to differentiate myself. Or I could just compete head to head, and I could be the guy that sells the same thing for less. All right, Joe, thank you.
Good. Thank you, Rich. Just another comment on Amazon. There are a couple things there. For example, they knew exactly what people were buying, and they could figure out, well, we don't have to buy it from Amazon Basic.
Yeah.
They'd go to the same manufacturers, and that would be an Amazon Basic. And what would you do if you were the brand that people were buying before? The other thing, of course, they woke up and said, we got all this compute power, maybe we could use something with it. And AWS became a big driver of their business. So looking at what you have, figuring out, what you can do with it is a constant evolving business model. So Rich, thank you very much.